The air inside the Chicago County Courthouse was heavy, almost suffocating. Rows of spectators filled the gallery, murmuring among themselves as they watched the scene unfold. The defense table seemed too large for the young man standing beside it, his hands in his pockets, his chin held high enough to show that he wasn't afraid. Marcus Reynolds, 20 years old, was charged with aggravated theft and resisting arrest. The charges were serious, but the way Judge Howard Blackwell looked at him made it clear that the real trial had nothing to do with the law. Blackwell leaned back in his chair, his fingers lazily drumming against the polished wood of his desk. He looked at Marcus over the frame of his glasses, his lips twisting into something between an ironic smile and a sneer. "Do you think you're some kind of legal expert?" His voice carried a dry amusement. "This isn't a debate club, boy." Some laughter rippled through the courtroom. The bailiff, the court reporter, even the prosecutor. Everyone was in on the joke. Marcus did not shrink. He wasn't laughing. He had spent years preparing for this moment. Not exactly this moment. He had never planned to be there as a defendant, but he knew the courtroom like the back of his hand. While other youths memorized basketball statistics, he memorized case law. While his friends played video games, he simulated trials in his head, arguing imaginary cases with himself. His mother, Andrea Reynolds, had worked as a legal assistant for over 20 years, and Marcus grew up hearing the stories she brought home, how prosecutors cut corners, how judges had favorites, how some defense attorneys barely even tried. He absorbed it all. By the age of 15, he could analyze a trial better than most law students. But none of that mattered to Blackwell. To him, Marcus was just another troubled youth. "Let's make this quick," the judge sighed, opening the case file. "I have a golf game at 2. The audience laughed again, but this time something changed. Marcus's lips curved into an almost imperceptible smile because Blackwell had just made his first mistake, but the courtroom had yet to notice. The prosecutor, Jonathan Hayes, rose from his seat with the air of a man who had already won. His suit was impeccable, his tie perfectly knotted, and his voice carried that rehearsed confidence of someone who had given the same speech 100 times before. "Your Honor, the state will prove, without a shadow of a doubt, that the defendant, Marcus Reynolds, was caught red-handed in a stolen vehicle. A 2023 BMW 5 Series reported missing only hours before his arrest. Police chased him through downtown, where he allegedly tried to flee before being apprehended. His fingerprints were found on the steering wheel. The prosecution maintains that the evidence speaks for itself." The words fell heavily. The crowd in the gallery stirred, whispering among themselves. On the surface it seemed damning. A stolen car, a chase, a flight. "Judge." Blackwell looked at Marcus over the rim of his glasses, then turned to Hayes. "Continue." The prosecutor walked toward the jury, his polished shoes clicking on the floor. "The defense may try to convince you that this was all a misunderstanding, that Mr. Reynolds is some unfortunate victim of circumstance." He turned, facing Marcus for the first time. "But let's be honest. What kind of victim flees from the police?" The tension in the room intensified. Judge Blackwell leaned forward, resting his eye, chin in his hand. Marcus didn't blink. Hayes continued, leafing through a stack of papers. "Your Honor, I have here the testimony of Officer Ryan Martinez, who personally witnessed the defendant behind the wheel before attempting to flee. The car was confirmed stolen. The arrest was made according to procedure." Blackwell snorted softly, nodding. "Seems simple enough to me. And to most people in the room, it probably was. The case seemed clear. A stolen car, a chase, an arrest. But Marcus had spent many years studying trials to spot the cracks. Still, he remained silent, watching, waiting. Judge Blackwell lightly tapped his gavel. "Very well, let's hear the defense's response." He turned to Marcus's attorney, a public defender named Vanessa Mitchell, who had spoken barely 3 words since entering the courtroom. She stood, shifting nervously. "Your Honor, my client." Marcus placed a hand on her arm, silently pleading. She hesitated, then sat down again. And for the first time, Marcus spoke. "I will represent myself, Your Honor." The room fell completely silent. Blackwell looked at him, clearly amused. "You what?" Marcus's voice was calm, firm. "I will defend myself." A murmur spread through the courtroom. The bailiff's eyebrows rose. Hayes's ironic smile faltered for just a second before he let out a sharp laugh. This is going to be interesting. But no one was laughing as Marcus took his first step forward, because everything was about to change. The weight of the courtroom settled around him as he adjusted his posture, his hands still in his pockets. He let the silence extend just long enough to make them uncomfortable, then finally spoke. "Your Honor, before I begin, I would like to confirm something with the prosecution." Hayes raised an eyebrow, crossing his arms. "Go ahead." Marcus took a slow step forward. "You said that Officer Ryan Martinez personally saw me behind the wheel before I was arrested, correct?" Hayes exhaled abruptly, already bored. "That's right. And is that testimony recorded in your report?" "Of course it is." Marcus nodded, then turned to Judge Blackwell. "Your Honor, I move to have that testimony excluded as evidence." Blackwell narrowed his eyes at him. "On what basis?" Marcus removed his hands from his pockets for the first time and gestured toward the prosecution's table. "Because Officer Martinez never saw me in that car. In fact, he wasn't even on duty when the chase began." A flicker of confusion crossed Hayes's face. "What are you talking about?" Marcus took another step forward. "Your Honor, if the court will allow, I would like to request a check of Officer Martinez's GPS records from that night. If your report says he saw me in the vehicle, then it should correspond to his location history. But," he let the word hang in the air, "I have a feeling it won't match." Now the murmurs in the gallery grew louder. Blackwell furrowed his brow, looking at Hayes. "Counselor." Hayes cleared his throat, his jaw tightening. "That report was filed by a law enforcement officer, Your Honor. Are we really going to take the word of a defendant over that of a trained professional?" Marcus gave a slight, almost casual nod. "If the officer was where he claimed to be, then the GPS data will prove it. But if he wasn't," he left the sentence unfinished. Blackwell studied him for a long moment, then turned to Hayes. "Does the prosecution have any objection to verifying the officer's GPS records?" Hayes hesitated. The pause was just long enough. The jury noticed. The gallery noticed. And, most importantly, the judge noticed. Marcus breathed silently. He had spent years watching trials, studying prosecutors, their tactics, the way they played the system. And there was one thing he knew for sure. If Hayes was that confident in his case, he wouldn't be hesitating. Blackwell sighed, rubbing his temple. "Counselor." Hayes finally shook his head. "No objection, Your Honor." But the shift had already begun. For the first time, the courtroom was not laughing. The courtroom was silent, but the tension was high. Hayes shuffled his papers, his polished confidence cracking at the edges. "Your Honor, while we await the GPS records, the fact remains that the defendant's fingerprints were found on the steering wheel of the stolen vehicle." Marcus nodded slightly, his face unreadable. "That is true." He stepped forward. "But let's talk about that evidence for a moment." Blackwell raised an eyebrow, gesturing for him to continue. Marcus turned to the jury, making eye contact with each of them. "The prosecution wants you to believe that finding my fingerprints on a car means that I stole it. That's the story they're selling. But let's think about this logically." He took a deep breath, his tone remaining calm and controlled. "Let's say you go into a department store and try on a jacket. You put your hands in the pockets, maybe zip it up, then put it back on the rack and leave. A few hours later, someone steals that jacket. Does the fact that your fingerprints are on it mean that you stole it?" Some jurors exchanged looks. Someone in the gallery murmured something under their breath. Marcus didn't give them time to recover. The car in question was parked in front of a convenience store hours before the alleged theft. I was inside the store with 3 friends, and yes, when we passed by the car, I leaned on it. I even opened the door because it was already unlocked. I didn't think much of it. I didn't take the car, I didn't drive, I didn't steal anything from inside. It was just a silly moment of curiosity. He let that sink in for a second. Then, with a voice that cut through the silence like a scalpel, he asked, "Does touching something make you a criminal?" Hayes cleared his throat, leafing through his notes, searching for something, anything, to regain control. Marcus wasn't finished. "And since we're on the subject, let's talk about how that fingerprint analysis was conducted." He turned to Blackwell. Your Honor, was the forensic expert in this case subpoenaed to testify? Blackwell blinked, taken by surprise by the question. He looked at Hayes. The prosecutor hesitated, then reluctantly answered, no. Marcus pressed his lips. So, let me get this straight. The state is using forensic evidence to try to convict me, but they didn't think it necessary to bring the expert who actually processed that evidence. No chance to cross-examine him, to question the chain of custody or the accuracy of the analysis. Hayes's jaw tightened. Marcus nodded as if that was all he needed to hear. Interesting. Judge Blackwell sighed, pressing the bridge of his nose. It was the look of a man realizing that this case wasn't the easy win he had assumed it would be. But Marcus wasn't done, because the next thing he was about to say would change everything. Marcus stepped forward slowly, his voice firm yet calm. Your Honor, I would like to submit as evidence an official statement from the owner of the vehicle. Judge Blackwell frowned. The owner? Marcus nodded. Yes, Mr. Lawrence Bennett, the registered owner of the stolen BMW, provided a statement to the police that, for some reason, was never included in the prosecution's documents, and I think I know why. He turned to Hayes. Do you remember what Mr. Bennett told the police the night his car was reported stolen? Hayes's jaw clenched. He knew exactly what was coming. Marcus didn't wait for him to answer. Instead, he pulled out a printed transcript from his file and read aloud. I left my car running when I went into the gas station. Some kid must have gotten in and taken off with it, but it wasn't the guy you arrested. I saw the kid, and he was white. A collective sigh ran through the courtroom. Marcus held the paper. This is from the original police report, the same report that the prosecution conveniently never mentioned. He turned to Judge Blackwell. The officer omitted this from his testimony. The prosecution ignored it. And yet they want this jury to believe that I, someone who doesn't even match the description of the real thief, is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt? Hayes stepped forward, trying to recover. Your Honor, that is irrelevant. The defendant was found in possession of the vehicle. But Marcus shook his head. No, I wasn't. His voice did not rise, but it cut through the courtroom with sharp precision. I was arrested blocks away from where the vehicle was abandoned, walking home after grabbing snacks with my friends. I wasn't in the car, wasn't near the car, wasn't fleeing from anything. The only thing tying me to this case is poor police work and assumptions. Judge Blackwell let out a slow sigh, rubbing his temple. The case was unraveling rapidly, and everyone knew it. Marcus turned to the jury. The real suspect got away that night. The police found a young black man in the general area and decided that was close enough. That's what this case is really about. Silence. Blackwell cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. Does the prosecution have anything further to add? Hayes looked tense, his face flushed. No, Your Honor. Judge Blackwell exhaled. He looked at Marcus for a long moment, then at the jury. Finally, he leaned forward and spoke the words that would stick with everyone in that room. Case dismissed. A moment of stunned silence, then chaos. Half the courtroom erupted, some in disbelief, others in quiet relief. The gallery stirred, reporters scribbling in their notepads. Marcus did not move immediately. He let the moment settle, letting the reality sink in for everyone. Judge Blackwell, still holding his gavel, looked at Marcus with an unreadable expression. There was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Recognition, perhaps even remorse. Marcus met his gaze, then turned to leave. But just as he reached the door, the judge spoke again. Mr. Reynolds. Marcus stopped, but did not turn around. Blackwell hesitated, then finally said, You should consider law school. Marcus smiled slightly. He didn't need to consider it. He was already on his way. Outside the courtroom, the air was thick with voices. Reporters swarmed the steps, their cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward like weapons. Marcus, did you know the judge would dismiss the case? What are you going to do next? How does it feel to outsmart an experienced prosecutor? Marcus pulled his hood over his head, ignoring the questions. He wasn't interested in the spectacle. It wasn't about proving how smart he was. It was about something bigger. His mother, Andrea, was waiting for him at the bottom of the stairs. Her arms were crossed, her face unreadable. For a long moment, she just looked at him, then finally shook her head and sighed. "Boy, you nearly gave me a heart attack." Marcus laughed, scratching his neck. "Had to take a risk, Mom." She regarded him for another second, then pulled him into a tight embrace. The cameras continued flashing, but Marcus was no longer paying attention to them. Across the street, standing by his car, Judge Blackwell watched. His posture was different now. The arrogance had vanished. His expression was no longer amused. It was something else, something closer to reflection. He hadn't expected this case to be more than routine. Just another day, another defendant, another guilty plea. But now he knew he would remember this one because Marcus had done something most people never could. He made the system take a long, hard look at itself, and for the first time, it blinked. Here is the lesson we must learn. How many other cases had followed this path? How many people had been convicted not because of evidence, but because of prejudice, shortcuts, and a system that cared more about closing cases than finding the truth? Marcus had the knowledge to fight, but what about those who didn't? This wasn't just about one case. It was about all of them. He knew what he had to do next. This courtroom would not be the last in which he stood. But next time, he wouldn't be the defendant. He would be the attorney. And when that day came, he wouldn't be alone. If this story made you think, even for a second, then share it. The justice system is built on laws, but it's administered by people, and people can change, but only if we force them to.